historic Newton. And thank you so much for coming. This is the last of our History Talk series with the Newton Free Library this year. We have been doing this partnership with them for over 10 years, and so we hope to continue it next year as well. So far this year, we have learned about media literacy and bias in the 18th century, and collaborations and support between Jewish immigrants and Irish immigrants. And tonight we're going to learn one more topic that we already see on the screen. So before I introduce Stephen, let me just say again, thank you for coming. If you're interested in what Historic Newton is doing, we have a newsletter sign up in the back. And we have some great events coming up, including a 21 plus cocktail party called Naughty Newton at Night, Revolution After Hours. That's next Saturday, so there's a flyer in the back if anyone's interested. And I also want to thank NewTV for filming tonight's talk. The link will be made available at a later date. So if you're interested, signing up for our newsletter is the best way to get notified of that. So I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Stephen Guerriero. He comes from the Charles River Museum of Industry and Innovation, which has as its mission to educate about America's industrial history and to encourage and inspire future innovation. It's located in the Francis Cabot Lowell Mill Complex on the banks of the Charles and Waltham. And the museum tells a story of American technical and business innovations that have been taking place in this region and continue to change the world. Stephen Guerriero is the Director of Education at the Charles River Museum and holds a Master's in Classical Studies from Brandeis University and a Master's in Education from Boston College. Before coming to the museum, Steve was a classroom teacher in the Neenah Public Schools for more than 20 years, most of that time teaching middle school social studies. He has a passion for history, archaeology, and the transformative power of education to help us use history to inform our present and prepare for the future. Also make a plug, he made a great exhibit in the library atrium that'll be up all through March, so I encourage you to check that out as well. So please join me in welcoming Stephen.
Hey, thank you. How's my level? Everybody can hear all right? All right, so thanks for having me. I'm gonna have to sign up for Naughty Newton at Night. So I am Steve Guerriero, and I work at the Charles River Museum. Some of you might know it. Some of you might be like, is that a museum with like fish displays? Or some people think it's the Waltham Museum. We are right off Moody Street, right by the Moody Street Dam. In fact, the museum is in a building that is the reason why the Moody Street Dam is there. If you bear with me, I'm going to be clicking my slides and also showing what's up here. But before I say that, afterwards, if you didn't get a look at some of the objects that I brought with me, I'd love for you to come and check them out. I'll make reference to some of them during my talk. At the end, when it's time for questions, I'm happy to take any questions. I will also tell you when I don't know the answer. And I have a call to action if any of you might have something that helps me, but I'll get to that at the end. Okay, so the Charles River Museum. That's where I work. It's also where the Industrial Revolution kicked off at scale, and actually that's a really important part of the story. So the talk tonight is called Shuttle Boats on the Charles, and maybe it's a little misleading. I'm not going to have an exhaustive look at all the boats going up and down the Charles. What I'm focusing on is the Waltham-Newton stretch, and I'm also going to use a specific steamship that I really like as a case study. So the Charles River Museum was once the Boston Manufacturing Company, founded by Francis Cabot Lowell in 1813. Now, Francis Cabot Lowell was a brilliant entrepreneur and innovator. He brought the power loom to the United States. He built the first large-scale private corporation in the United States, the first fully integrated factory. And when I say integrated factory, I mean all the steps of textile manufacture are done under one roof, powered by one source, which is the Charles River, and done by one workforce, which is commonly called the mill girls. These are young women from around New England who were brought to the company, lived in company housing, which was on site, and ate company food, and were paid in cash, so they could be sent. So it could be sent back home. That was a whole bunch of innovation in one space. And so what better place than a former Francis Cabot Lowell mill to house the Museum of Industry and Innovation. What you see here, this piece right there is Francis Cabot Lowell's original mill. Now most of it is senior housing, and our museum was where the smokestack is, and that's because we're housed in the power plant at the mill. Come on and visit us sometime. We'd love to have new people come and visit us. We have events, lectures, concerts, and lots of good stuff. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight. What I do want to focus on, and a few through lines that you'll see in my talk, and if you kind of get lost in some of the details I get into, no problem, I taught 6th grade. But if you are thinking of themes, a couple of themes I'm thinking about is the rise of the industrial middle class, the working class. And what that looks like when you go from a rural agrarian environment to a city, a fully functioning city with an industry. Waltham can easily be called an industry town, although unlike many towns, it had several industries, including Boston Manufacturing and Waltham Watch. It's Watch City in Waltham. All right. So the Boston Manufacturing Company, this is what it looks like around the turn of the 1900s. It's a campus, it's a mill complex, and it represents many phases of growth, just like the city. And so what you're seeing here on the left is the Moody Street Dam. Many of you drive over it or see it every day as you go through Waltham. And what you're seeing on the broad side here facing us is a series of shops, machine shops, dye warehouses. Almost none of the buildings in the front are there. Many of them are under Landry Park, which is the MDC, I'm dating myself, the DCR park in the front there, which is going to be renovated this spring, we're excited to say. So the museum represents not just the textile cotton industry, but just innovation and industry in general. Like we heard at the beginning, we are curating a case that the Newton Free Library has very generously offered to us for Women's History Month. In the front case, one thing I would love to put a thumbtack in is that you are looking at the site of the first industrial labor strike in American history. And it was carried out by women who worked there. Not only that, the women struck when the men didn't. So we have a letter from 1821, and there may or may not be another old mill site that says they have first strike day about 1824. In 1821, we have a letter from a machinist to his brother. This machinist is named Isaac Markham, and he says to his brother, complaining after the death of Lowell, that the owners of the Boston Manufacturing were acting a lot more like traditional capitalist corporate owners, and they were cutting pay. In 1821, they cut pay of all the unmarried men, and they went back to work the next day. And he says in the letter, they tried to play the same trick on the girls, but they, as one, revolted, and the works stopped for 2 days. And that couldn't be clearer. As one, and the work stopped. First industrial labor strike in American history, right here by the young women who were between 18 and 24 years old, pre-marriage, not living at home. They're living in the house provided by the company they're striking against, eating the food that the company has bought for them, and they're endangering their livelihoods in that way. So I want to make sure we recognize that, because I think that's also an important part of the story. You can't have the growth of industry without the growth of labor. And when we talk about the working class, that's who we're talking about. And so that's who are riding the boats we're going to be talking about, and who are looking to the river for first power and industry, and later for fun. Okay, so you know the Charles. There's been songs sung about it, how dirty it once was. We all remember, maybe, Governor Bill Weld jumping in fully clothed. The Charles is 80 miles from Echo Lake in Hopkinton to Boston Harbor. It's a meandering river. The indigenous name, some say, I think convincingly, but not for sure, that it was called the Quinnipiaguan by the indigenous folks here, and that maybe comes from a word that means wandering or turning or meandering. The river descends about 350 feet from its origin to sea level. And it varies in depth from 2 to 15 feet. The river, especially this summer, because I see it every day when I go to work, was really shallow at certain points. We were in a drought, and you can really see the effect on the river. And I love this little map. I have a bigger blown up version down here with even if from a distance you see how wandering it is. And that's going to be important too for those of you who know the lakes region of Newton. We're in this special kind of weird bend that the river makes, and it actually makes for a really perfect space for recreation. There's all these little coves. There was Norumbega Park, which I'll talk about, and people wanted to go from their working life to a leisure recreation life, and the river provided that. This is one of my favorites. So recently we got a big donation from the Charles River Watershed Association of mostly slides and some historical material, memorabilia, and some older photos. This is from 1857 from Ballou's Pictorial, and it depicts a race on the Charles. This is obviously in Boston, but I think it gives an indication that even in the early days of urbanization and the industrial growth of America, we see people going to the river for recreation. Which is interesting because for most of the settlers here, and for what was happening at my museum when it was a mill, they're looking to the river for power. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So, obviously before we had settlement from Britain, we had several indigenous tribes living on this space. One thing about the river is that, rivers, water, fresh water, have a centrality in indigenous culture where it really represents life. Water is life. And so the river had an essential role to play in the survival of these indigenous tribes. People like the Massachusetts, the Nipmuc, the Pawtucket, and the Wampanoags would use the river especially for building fish weirs. So the river, and I'll talk about this in a moment, is when you see it today, it doesn't look like what it used to. It used to be a tidal river, and the tide used to come way up the river in a way that it does not now because of the series of dams. And that also provided things like salt marshes and flats. And one of my favorite Facebook posts from the Waltham group is somebody complaining that somebody's discarding their mussels after eating into the river. Like all these mussel shells in the river that somebody must be throwing off the bridge. And it's like, no, those are freshwater mussels. Like they're supposed to be there. And so were there old pictures where the salt flats would go out and there would be these huge beds of shellfish that people would exploit for food. It was also a transportation artery where indigenous folks were using the river to move around, including in canoes, and also recently the Nipmucs have been bringing back a very special kind of canoe called a mishoon, which is essentially a hollowed out, a dugout canoe. It's a log of a large tree that they slowly burn over something like 48 hours down into it, carefully curating the fire so that it's just coals, and it essentially burns out the center of this log, which becomes a seaworthy vessel. It's really cool. And so most of the fish they're eating are alewife, herring, and dramus fish. They would come up the river from the harbor to spawn. None of that can happen now because we have the Charles River Dam, we have the Watertown Dam, we have the Moody Street Dam, and those dams don't just control the flow of water, but they also control the ecology in a way that we want to make sure we recognize. Oh, and I should say, that mosaic is outside of our museum in one of the window wells, put there by the New England Mosaic Society. And so we'd love you to come through. It's one of three. This is the pre-industrial, we have an industrial, and then we have a present day. And the present day one in the hillside. So in this hillside, you see indigenous patterns woven into the mosaic. In the present day one, they've actually taken little discarded Waltham watch pieces and embedded it in the hill. It's really cool. And it's right on the boardwalk there. All right, so I'm gonna do like a fast forward of like colonial to industrial. But I think it's important because it helps us understand the relationship of people who were living near the river with the river and the rise of this industrial working class. That actually is pretty relevant to today, I think. So here you see Eden Vale. This is from 1793 of Massachusetts Magazine. It's a little picture of an idyllic, bucolic scene. What you're seeing here is, if you look to the right-hand side behind the tree, you kind of have to look closely, there's a water wheel. And the water wheel is in the water next to what will become the Moody Street Dam. So that site in Waltham has a natural 10-foot drop. And the Moody Street Dam that's there now is about 12 feet, and it's granite blocks that were put there in 1847. Before that, it was wood. And those little houses behind the water wheel are John Boyce's paper mill. Not a very successful paper mill. It was put there in the 1780s or 90s. And Francis Cabot Lowell essentially buys it. We actually have the books at Baker's Library at Harvard Business School. He had a yard sale, essentially, with all the mill supplies. And then the most expensive thing that he paid John Boyce for were the water rights. Something like $5,000 for 3 years of water rights on the river. And when he was chartered to create the Boston Manufacturing Company, that was really important because water was going to power the new industry that he was going to build. He went to the UK in 1810. There's lots of stories about him stealing the technology of the power loom. He went to Harvard. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant mathematician. We know this from a lot of documentation. I don't think that he memorized, for example, every single part. He memorized the principles behind what he was seeing. And then he and Paul Moody kind of locked themselves in his office, and they built a power loom. It was always designed to be in the Charles. It was always designed to have a water wheel attached to it through a belt and line shaft system, which you can still see in our museum. Not the original one, but one kind of like it. Although when they were designing the prototype, they had a guy just kind of moving the wheel around to mimic the flow of the water. The Moody Street Dam now holds about 350 to 400 horsepower. When you drive by the Moody Street Dam and you see all that water flowing over and say, oh, how wonderful, it looks nice. Because Francis Cabot Lowell would see that and be like, what an incredible waste. I cannot believe they're letting all that energy just flow over the top. Because at the time the Boston Manufacturing Company was there, they were capturing the entire flow of the river and channeling it around in what is now the parking lot under the building where the wheels were, and those would turn to power all the machinery, which redistributed the energy to all the rest of the mill. It's incredible. The founder of our museum, Mike Folsom, was a professor at MIT, and he always said, it's not that the mill was full of machines. You have to think of the mill as one big machine. And it's one power source, and those mill girls and the machinists who are working there, they are part of that energy that's powering the machine. And so the river is always seen as something to exploit, to use. You know that the Charles is one of 3 tributaries of Boston, the other being the Neponset and the Mystic. And even way back in the 17th century, where I live in Dedham, they created Mother Brook as one of the first industrial canals. They connected the Charles to the Neponset. So it spills into the Neponset, even though they're from separate watersheds, which is kind of interesting. All right, so the early settlers start to dam the river almost immediately into the 1600s and then into the 1700s. The damming of the river has immediate consequences. So the fish weirs of the indigenous people, those are gone. The mills even start to argue with one another. So downriver from Francis Cabot Lowell mill site, we have the Waltham Wool and Cotton Mill. And they're doing their mill thing, and they put a dam, and they also are turning their machines. And Francis Cabot Lowell, because he's well capitalized, and because he has a Cabot side of his family and a Lowell side of his family, which actually is really a good thing to have if you can get both. And so he had all this capital, and his idea was he quickly built the mill girl housing. And perhaps, we think, one of his first ideas was to poach the workforce from the Waltham wool and cotton mill, and then have them work for him, which actually did happen. He buys the mill downriver, he breaks it down, smashes it, and then they remove the dam. It powers his wheel with all the force. Eventually they'll build, which I'll talk about, the Bleachery. And that neighborhood in Waltham is still called the Bleachery. But what's happening in Boston is a complete kind of reckoning with the natural environment being changed in order to serve the urbanization and industrialization. So here you have an image of the workers cutting down fill from Beacon Hill. You might also know later they will fill Back Bay. A lot of that fill comes from Needham, where the Coke plant is, next to like TripAdvisor in that area. They also, the Battle of Bunker Hill can't really be I mean, now it's in Gloucester for the reenactment, but they can't have it reenacted so much anymore because there's not really a hill in the way that there used to be, because a lot of it was taken down and filled elsewhere. That also changes the river from a tidal, salty river to, once they fill it in, it becomes fully a freshwater river. And you can imagine how that changes the ecology as well. And then we also have urban runoff. So we have sewage. We're living in a time before germ theory, so people just think, yeah, put it in the river, it'll go away. And then people in Boston are doing that, not realizing, or not caring maybe, that people in Watertown and Waltham and all the way up to Hopkinton are doing the same thing. So by the time it gets to Boston, when they still have Back Bay, when the tide would go out, you can imagine the multi-sensory experience that would be. Pretty, and that's at a time when they believed in miasma, like the bad smell itself would kill you, which is like, they're so close. It's almost that, but it's the germs. We also have kind of controlling the flow, so the dams are meant to have a more steady flow. If you have a mill and a factory on the river, you can't have a mad rush of water followed by a few weeks of drought. That will affect the way your machines are working. So part of the job of the dam is to hold the water in reserve so that you can have a constant, steady flow. You can imagine if you have your power looms and they're weaving cotton, all of a sudden they're going, at this crazy speed, and then they're going too slow. At a crazy speed, the fibers will rip. At a too slow speed, it'll clog the machines. So it has to be there's a lot of engineering that goes into the power redistribution. And then, let's see, here's our guy, Francis Cabot Lowell. We have no pictures of him. We only have this one silhouette, which is from his wedding. His wife also has a silhouette. And it's held at the Mass Historical Society. This year, on April 7th, is his 250th birthday. So kind of an important guy in this area. The Lowell Institute was founded with his money, and it's still a thing. They support GBH. They started GBH as public television and radio. They started Harvard Extension School, and they still support a lot of educational programs in Greater Boston. But more importantly, Francis Cabot Lowell had this idea that we are going to make a worker paradise-ish. So he goes to the UK on his trip, and he goes to Scotland in this, now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site at New Lanark. And it's this kind of model town in Scotland with the river and the mill housing. And so it mirrors a lot of what he's thinking, because he also sees in London the desperation of the, see, at this time they're not working class, like the peasant class, the people who are barely getting by. We have debtor's prison, we have accounts from Dickens describing just the kind of anguish of poverty. And as well, in the courtly life, this huge bump up in lifestyle for the elites, for the king and the nobles and the landed gentry, which for him, Francis Cabot Lowell, he's interested in doing something in between, which is kind of ironic because he's a Cabot and a Lowell. So he dies at the age of 42. He's born in 1775. He's kind of sickly. He dies in 1817, which, by the way, mirrors the lifespan of Jane Austen, too. Exactly the years. Okay. So let's talk about industrial Waltham and Newton. So almost immediately, what Francis Cabot Lowell builds is incredibly successful. So in 1814, he builds one mill that is cranking out at scale cotton cloth. Pretty basic stuff. It would be kind of rough to the touch, like a cotton duct or a canvas. And he's doing it in wide format cloth. And at the time he starts producing the first cloth, there's no domestic seller of domestic American cloth. Most of it comes from the UK. And after the War of 1812, there's this fear of dumping of this cheap British cloth. And so, like Alexander Hamilton says, it's not enough to be politically independent from Britain. We need to be economically and commercially independent. And so even just a few years ago during COVID, we understand what supply chain interruption means. And we also understand what happens like when you're not getting enough eggs into stores, what happens to the price of eggs. And so I think that Francis Cabot Lowell is doing the right thing at exactly the right time. And so at the end of 1814, the first cloth comes out of his factory. By 1816, he's building another mill next to it, double the size, with 2 water wheels underneath, producing double the amount of cloth. And that kind of is just an unbelievable scale up. That mill, that second 1816 mill, is what is copied 10 more times up in Lowell. So at the time it was Chelmsford. The Merrimack has a lot more power than our beloved Charles, about 10 times more power. It's not an accident that they set up 10 mills all in that center that the proprietors of locks and canals bought. And it's now the city of Lowell. That's where, and it's named after Francis Cavallol, who dies in 1817. So think about this. He starts in 1814, double the size mill in 1816. In 1822, 10 times the size in Lowell. And then you got Lawrence and Haverhill and Manchester and Biddeford, Maine. And they're essentially replicating the Waltham-Lowell system. Our friends at the Lowell National Park refer to us in Waltham as the mothership, which is appropriate. That is the appropriate amount of respect. And so the ancillary industries are also popping up. So some of you may have heard in Waltham, there's one neighborhood called the Bleachery, another neighborhood called the Chemistry. Those are because in the 1820s you have the opening of the Bleachery. So we have all this fabric, we need to bleach it. In order to bleach it, we need to create bleach. And we're bringing in, at its height, 10,000 pounds of sulfur a week to make into sulfuric acid, to make into bleach. And these businesses are right on the river, like next to the river. And so you can imagine they're not only harnessing the power of the river, but treating it as a waste disposal of bleach and sulfuric acid, which I'm sure is wonderful. And the chemical company is called the Newton Chemical Company because it's on the Newton side. All right, great. So here's a great old picture of the Newton Chemical. It had that very distinct cone funnel shaped building. What they're doing is, I believe it's platinum. They have retorts, so kind of like distilling equipment, that they're distilling the sulfur into sulfuric acid, which I can't even imagine working in a place like that. And then here is an 1826 painting. This is a line drawing of a painting by Elijah Smith that shows the mill with the bell on top. By the way, Paul Revere's bell, 162 pounds. They spent $97.50. And that's the first 1814 mill. The one next to it, the bigger one, is the 1816 mill. And these little houses right here are the mill girl houses. We have 3 single-story and 4 double-story. By the way, they still exist. And Mort Isaacson, who is a longtime historical commissioner in Waltham, has, I think, definitively proven that they weren't destroyed when new buildings were put up, they were moved. And that now, if you go a few streets over past the car wash on River Street, there's a couple of streets, one's called Lawton Place and another's called Jackson Place, and there are 3 very similar single-story houses in a row, and then across the way there are 4 double-story houses in a row. And he didn't tell me how, but he's been to the basement of one of them and has seen the joists, and they represent 18-teens technology, not 1880s and 90s, which is what they say on Zillow. I have a Zillow alert, so if there's ever an open house there, I'm not actually buying it, but I will go there and go to the basement. This is great. Can I see the boiler? Okay, so this is what the inside of the Waltham Bleachery would look like. What I want you to notice is the belt and line shaft system of machines. All these machines are powered by the energy of the river. And so people have this industrial relationship with the river. The river is a source to be exploited. Like I said, they go from water wheels, later to water turbines, which are much more efficient. And then by the 1830s and 40s, they start getting into steam power. And at first, steam is a backup. So in case you don't have enough water flow, the steam will give you a backup, it will give you some extra energy. And also they're steaming the factory itself. So I don't know if anybody does like knitting or spinning or anything like that, but cotton fibers, unlike wool fibers, are quite short. And they can be very brittle if they're dry. So they would pump in steam into the factory to make the cotton fiber more pliable. So the average kind of temperature of the mill girl wearing Victorian clothes, about 100 degrees and about 85% humidity, and they would work. The bell rang to wake them up at 4:40 in the morning, half an hour for breakfast at 7, half an hour for lunch at 12, and then work till sundown, 6 days a week, go to church on Sunday. And so and by the way, that was an improvement on their lives, on their family subsistence farms in New England, where they were seen as a drag. as in the men and the boys would do kind of the hard chores. The women would do things like weaving and spinning with barn looms, which if you've ever used one of those, they're called barn loom because they only fit in the barn, and big and clunky, and they take weeks to make a single textile. And so now these girls are living in company housing. They are getting paid in cash. So even though they have to send some of their cash back home, now these women are coming from these rural New England towns, but they got a little money to spend, buy a new outfit, new hat, whatever you want. And then the idea was when they were ready to get married, they would move back home, and that would be a dowry. Soon after Francis Cabot Lowell dies, that kind of changes, and the industry becomes much more kind of exploitative. Within a few years of that, so Waltham becomes an industry town of the Boston manufacturing. Very quickly, with this trained workforce and machine shops. Remember, these are machine shops that are making other machines. You can't buy these. So you would have like people in Lowell say, I don't want like this power loom. I want your whole machine shop. Actually, I want the entire thing. The wheels, the floor, I want the whole thing. Just build it for me over there. Same thing in Haverhill, same thing in Lawrence. And so you have an industry town that's actually producing industries, not just cotton textiles. Here's the Waltham Watch Company. So if you've ever been by there, it's actually a really nice spot to walk by. There's a trail that goes by, a canoe by. The Waltham Watch Company, now it's luxury condos, but back in the day, they were pioneering precision machining. So now we have a really skilled workforce that are taking something that used to be for elites, a jeweled pocket watch, that would have been something that would take weeks to make, very expensive, only the elites would have it, and more as kind of like a decoration. Now with industry, the mill girls are getting paid by the hour. So who gets to say when the hours begin and end? In fact, at one point, they were not allowed to have their own watches on the job. And you can imagine why. We want to tell you when it's time to go. We'll let you know. We'll ring the bell. You don't need a watch. And so by the time you get to the Civil War, though, its slogan is a watch in every pocket. Abraham Lincoln had a Waltham watch. Teddy Roosevelt had one. John Jacob Astor had one. Calvin Coolidge had one. These go from being kind of specialty implements to everybody having a watch. By the way, you need a watch not only for getting paid. Now you have the railroads. And so if you have 2 railroads on the same track, Waltham had 3 railroads, you need to know exactly when the next one is coming through and how long it's going to be. And then once you have railroads crossing time zones, you need to know even more when, with accuracy, are the next trains coming through. All of this takes people. So we're getting people moving to Waltham, moving to this area, so that they can work in these factories. This is good wage jobs. When you look at the landscape of what folks were doing in the Waltham Watch starts around 1850s. They moved from Boston because in Boston, dirt, which is kicked up by all the traffic, is getting in the little precision machine watches. And so they move out to Waltham right on the river because they have clean airflow. They're working by sunlight. And so they build these tall factories. And so the workers are getting this skill, and both Boston Manufacturing and the Waltham Watch Company set up schools and libraries. And they find an educated workforce is really important, so that they are training these people to be excellent workers, and the population is growing. So here we have industrial Waltham. This is mid-19th century, some of the places you might recognize. Here you see the complex of the Boston Manufacturing Company. We see the Moody Street Dam. A little bit this way is the Waltham Watch Company. We have the bleachery down there, the chemistry over here. So the railroads coming through. We are seeing a very rapid escalation in population growth and also in industries. So all those people who are working in the factories, let's talk about some boats. And the reason we're talking about boats is because these factory workers are working 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and they have this new thing called a weekend. And what am I going to do with the weekend? Well, I have a little bit of cash that I made from my job during the week. The last thing I want to do is go into the city, because I work in kind of a dusty industrial space, and they go to the river. So now this river that was seen as this source of exploitation of energy, of waste disposal, is now seen as a refuge from the workaday to now have some fun. And you see folks in the canoe here. I bet a lot of you can pinpoint exactly where this is. And a lot of the boats aren't there. Sometimes you can see some of the pilings that are left, like over by Prospect Street near the Waltham Watch Company was Nuttings on the Charles, and now it's just literally just posts in the water. But the scale of these places were huge. The boathouses. Canoes become really important for a few reasons. One is you could go on a date and there's no room for a chaperone, sorry. And so you could get with your, person that you're interested in, you could paddle out and nobody could really bother you. Although one of my favorite statistics is between 1901 and 1904, the Newton police arrested 37 people for inappropriate activity in a canoe. I'll leave it to your imagination why it's an odd number. Okay, so they're going out, they're building these canoes. The businesses in Waltham have at least 3 major manufacturers of canoes. We're talking now maybe the post-Civil War up until the 1900s. Folks like H.B. Arnold and the Waltham Manufacturing Company by Charles Metz is making bikes, which is another in tandem with canoes for especially young people to get from place to place, to meet up with people. Susan B. Anthony says the invention of the bicycle is one of the biggest moments in women's liberation, because now you don't have to wait for your dad or brother to hitch up the horses and ask you where you're going. And so the boathouse infrastructure also becomes really important. In fact, a lot of the money is not made just on the canoe manufacture, but the storage of the canoes. You have to put them somewhere, and the rental of canoes. Maybe I don't want to own one, but I want to take one out for a day. Notice this kind of idyllic scene. And what it's going to contrast with is many of these places were at the site of the end of the train tracks. So you have Riverside, and in Waltham we have 3 different trains coming through. So that's an important piece of it. Between 1840 and 1880, the population of Newton increased 4 times. And then by 1890, it increased 44% more. Imagine the town as it is now, increasing in population by 44% in 10 years. Or multiplying by 4 in a series of 40 years. In Waltham, it was something similar, although Waltham, because it was more compact, had fewer. But we go from about 3,300 in 1840 to 24. Sorry, that's new. In Waltham, we have a similar population growth of like 4 times. Many of these people are working in these industries, so that's important. And many of those people working in industries are now taking advantage of what I would call a leisure industry. So canoes are part of that. This also becomes important for folks like urban planners. So notice in the background, what do we have? A train trestle. So we're seeing how the river is not only a source of recreation, but it's an obstacle to get around. People are building cities right around it and right next to it. And so that's an important part of it. We also have, Thoreau and Emerson writing about back to nature and that kind of thing. Well, why do you have to go back to nature? It's because we kind of forgot about nature because we were in our factories. Here's another shot. See if you can guess. And then we have, these boathouses were tremendously large. They had restaurants, they had dance halls. My parents were actually married at Mosley's on the Charles in the 70s in Dedham, and which is still there, although sometimes I look at the pilings and I'm like, I'm not sure how much longer. But these boathouses, bathhouses, they cater to thousands of people. And they would go from Moody Street in Waltham, and what I'm going to talk about in a moment is the White Swan. They were taking boats upriver to Norumbega Park, the Cove. My family, my mom's side, are Goodales, and so there were a whole slew of Goodales from Auburndale. We even have a distant Goodale that was a agent for the Boston Manufacturing Company, and they grew up in Auburndale, and we had family reunions at the Cove, which some of you probably know. Now, most of it is the Marriott that's the most noticeable thing up there. Here's my boat. I really like it. So this is the White Swan. So the White Swan is a side-wheel paddle steamer that went from Moody Street, and it would take you all the way up to Norumbega or Riverside, 25 cents round trip. It only operated on the weekends. Because again, remember, people are not using these to commute to work. because many of them are living on site in company housing. They don't need to move around a lot. But also we have streetcars. So right in front of Waltham Watch Company, there used to be a streetcar that would go right there and take people back and forth from the other neighborhoods in Waltham to work at the factory. And the mill girls and then later the Irish immigrants that come in the 1840s and 50s and essentially replace the mill girls, they're living in row houses built by the Boston Manufacturing Company. So this little guy, can you imagine and I've seen this in multiple documents, between 100 and 150 people would get on this thing. One of my favorites says, 100 comfortably, 150 not quite as safe. Yeah, I think so. And you'll see like the steam smokestack coming out the top. You can imagine this thing chugging along. It's probably really cool, to be honest. One call to action, if any of our Newton folks, I have never found a picture on the boat, or rather close up to the boat. This is as close as we get as it drifts away, but I would love to have something a little bit closer. By the way, this only runs from 1873, when it starts, to 1891. And the reason is because the Prospect Bridge is put in place. And if you know the river, you know the Prospect Street Bridge is very low with these arches, these stone arches. So according to accounts, it wasn't so much that this ship was unseaworthy or anything like that. They just needed a smaller boat to get back and forth to make it viable. The owners traded it for a ship called a Forest Grove, for obvious reasons. Forest Grove is right there. I have not come across a picture of the Forest Grove. I heard there's another one called a Gosling, which also I would love to see. But remember, they are bringing recreational day trippers. So they're going up to the cove, they're going to Norumbega, they're going to Riverside, they're having a picnic. They're hanging out. They're getting with their sweetheart or whatever in a canoe. 37 people. So we're making sure that we have a way to make money from folks even when they're not working. Here's the dock in Waltham. On the right-hand side, you see the Moody Street Bridge. It doesn't look like that now, but you can kind of see if you look under the bridge now where Moody Street would go down. In the distance on the right-hand side, some of the mill girl houses that were still there. This is from a book that was published in 1886. And can you see the dock right here where, what is there now? Basically the trail. There's not really a building there. It's kind of near Rockland Trust in that area. You have the White Swan pulled up to its berth. And you would come down, you would get on the boat, you would pay your 25 cents, and they would take you on your sweet way upriver to Norumbega. And then we have other places that they're visiting too, the dance halls, Nutting's on the Charles comes up later. Here's just a quick clip from some of the newspapers. We have Harvey Bartlett owned and operated the White Swan, and it was a side-wheel boat that sailed from Moody Street Bridge to the Grove. He goes into business with Evan Illingsworth, and again, they start in 1873, and then they go to the Forest Grove, which would pass under the... Having seen the Prospect Street Bridge up close, I cannot imagine a paddle steamer going under it, but apparently the Forest Grove was low enough, which is quite crazy. You know Norumbega Park, I'm talking to historic Newton, so you know this place, it's got the zoo, it's got the vaudeville show, the whole thing. So this was owned and operated, it was opened by people who owned the rail car. Right? Because that's a way to get people to come out to Riverside, to take advantage of their extra spending cash, and the railroad. By the way, the Boston Manufacturing Company, the owners of that invest in Lowell, but they also invest in things like shipping and insurance, and they invest in the trains. This is another big thing. Even the innovation, aside from the machines, is the corporate structure. So you have the Boston Manufacturing Company shareholders. By the way, it's the first joint stock company in the United States. They own what's called the proprietors of locks and canals in Lowell. So they own this section of the Merrimack where the locks are. That is the primary shareholder of the Merrimack Manufacturing Company. And so this cash is just swirling among these people. And they're all intermarrying, the Cabots, the Lowells, the Jacksons, the Appletons. And so this money kind of sloshes around as they reinvest capital into industries. And here you see like train money being put into amusement park money. And again, here's the streetcar that you might be taking. You know, Commonwealth Ave in Newton has that long grassy median, and that's where the streetcar was. And so this is at Commonwealth Avenue. At Riverside, we still have the Green Line stop there, and the Riverside kind of recreational park was created by Charles Hubbard and given over to what is now the DCR in 1914. Here's an old clipping from 1909 for H.B. Arnold. So H.B. Arnold is a canoe manufacturer in Waltham. We have 2 H.B. Arnold canoes in our collection. These things are beautiful. They're one of them just restored by the Wooden Canoe Heritage Association. Shout out to the Norumbega branch. These things are made of, the inside is mahogany. And they're, these cruisers of the day. We even have like one that still has its cushion with its seat back. You could put like, we have pictures with a phonograph in it. They would say that you could walk from one side of the Charles to the other just by stepping on canoes. And you can imagine, like, yes, this is a lot of people having fun. This is an industry. Like when you have that many people wanting to get onto the river with a canoe, now we're not just talking about making these things, we're talking about renting them, we're talking about getting extra money from the restaurant. My sister is a Disney World person, and man, they have that business down. It's like, yeah, you got the ticket to get in, you got to buy lunch, you got to buy stuff. The kids want to get stuff. It's the whole wraparound thing of like, let's make you a customer out of every piece of the process. And then we also have in our collection a Robertson racing canoe, restored by the Wooden Canoe Heritage Association, and that was made in Auburndale. These are beautiful pieces. So we also get what I'm calling the canoeing class. So maybe like a middle class group of people, working class. They are working hard in the factory. Maybe you're at Waltham Watch using precision machines, and then you have this extra cash. You have the money to spend to go out dancing, to rent a canoe, to paddle out, to put your phonograph on your canoe. And so they even get into athletics like racing. We have loving cups, which are the trophies that you can win. A few of the pictures that I have here relate to that. So it's not just kind of drifting downriver. It's also an athletic piece that you see in the Harvard and BU boathouses further down the river. And so I like this one because it just describes the types of boats, which I'm sure a few people in our audience know a lot more than I do. But at Riverside are the clubhouses of the Newton Boat Club and the Boston Canoe Club and the Parleto and Robertson boathouses, where visitors may hire yachts, canoes, wherries, lapstreaks, randans, Whitehall boats, steam launches, and other craft. So you can imagine this crowded throughway of recreation between Moody Street and Norumbega. It's really something to think about. I included this little poem. It's a lot of fun. You will find the public boathouse very near where you leave the train. So again, like even still, you have remember the train is owning Norumbega Park. So while midway down the river, another is seen again, and that belongs to the Newton Boat Club. And from its central float, many a lad and lassie taking canoe or boat, 37, inappropriately, have drifted toward Waltham, telling the old tale of a love they bore each other, of a love that should never fail. Others not quite so romantic, because not as far along, spend their boating time in a social way, singing portions of a popular song. For the fellows are very attentive in paddling young ladies about, and it quite often occurs they escort them to town, taking the late cars out. So, and actually, that actually speaks to the railroad would add extra cars later at night to get these folks so they can, it gets dark. You want to go home right as soon as sunset hits. And so, so the White Swan era is pretty brief, and we have lots of kind of documentary newspaper evidence. It actually was a newspaper story when they would open the season in April and they would close the season in September. The White Swan would start its launches. So this is a seasonal thing for recreation. This isn't a shuttle boat that's bringing commuters back and forth to work. Some of that was happening further downriver in the basin. We're talking like Watertown down to Boston Harbor, but up here it's all about having fun on the river and dumping our wastewater into it. Here's another close-up of the White Swan. I mean, this thing is a party boat. 150 people would get on this thing. And actually, we have another newspaper account that says people were afraid of it tipping over. It was repurposed. It originally was one story, and when they brought it to Moody Street to start doing this, they added the second story, which, OSHA would have a fit, but or the Coast Guard, whoever was in charge of that. But a side wheel steamer, they replaced the 10 horsepower engine with 2.8s. So now we got 16 horsepower going up and down the river for 25 cents. And here's another one that I really enjoy. They talk about a Waltham Sunday. And this gives you like a glimpse into the life of the working class there. Yesterday was another quiet Sunday in Waltham. This is 1885. White Swan, loaded with an unusual amount of tender freight, sailed the silvery waters of the Charles River. The druggists sold cooling soda, fragrant American Havanas, papers, toothpicks, and other necessaries or luxuries. Church services were rather thinly attended, but the fields, woods, and waters were full of people. So, I mean, you know, why are you going to go to church when you can go hang out at Riverside with your date? The police made 3 liquor raids yesterday. The only successful one was at Patrick B. Murphy's. So, I don't know if any descendants of Patrick B. Murphy, but sorry to hear that. And then we even have a reunion of Massachusetts 16th Regiment. And they are using the steamer almost like a charter boat to bring them up to their picnic in the Grove, up in Forest Grove. And N.P. Banks, who is one of the most famous kind of military officers that come out of Waltham, is there, and he greatly enjoys the trip, highly amused at an incident which occurred. An individual got into the boat in tow by the steamer when someone cast off the line, thus compelling him to pull for the Grove, meaning he got in the boat that was helping the steamer, but he didn't get into the steamer, so he had to paddle himself. Here's another wide-angle lens. Some of you might recognize what we're looking at. So if you kind of go to like Acapulco's now, is that what? No, Margaritas, in where Grover Cronin used to be, and you're looking across. On the right-hand side is the Moody Street Bridge. We see the White Swan right at its birth. There we see downtown Waltham, the first church. And so you can see the Moody Street Dam, and we have letters from Francis Capilolo to Paul Moody saying, we have a perfect place for a dam with minimal ponding. So the spread of the water upstream is really important when you're putting a dam. If it goes too far, you're essentially creating a marsh. If it can be contained like a pond, then you have the perfect conditions for harnessing it for your mill. And that's what we have here, and that's why we have this large kind of lake in front of the Moody Street Dam even now. And again, here we have the launch of the season. So April 9th in 1874, the opening of navigation. So this includes the canoes and all those recreational boats, but the White Swan leaves her winter moorings near Mount Feake Cemetery. I'd love to know if they dry docked it or they just left it there in the water over the winter. I can't imagine. Down to its wharf near Moody Street. And one of my favorite things is the carnival. So I don't know if you probably know a little bit maybe about the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century carnival. They would have these amazing displays of lanterns and lights and every boat you can imagine. At one point they had a replica of one of Christopher Columbus's boats, and they were covered with these lanterns, and they would have almost like a boat procession from Moody Street up to Norumbega, and people would line the riverbank to watch these, and then all the companies on the riverbank would light up. So like the Waltham Watch Factory was fully lit up, and some of the richer houses on the other side of the river would have lawns that went down to the river, and they'd have garden parties, kind of like you would imagine, like if anybody's ever driven or like boated through Hyannisport, and you see the Kennedy compound, you see all those lawns, and you're like, who lives there? And they're having a great time. And so the same thing's happening on the river. And so they are working all year for these things. Just a quick excerpt from a newspaper. The north shore of the river has but a few houses, and not much attempt was made to light them, as it was considered likely to mar the effect of the rest. But the footbridge and the south shore, as well as a procession of boats, were brilliant with Japanese lanterns and colored lights, while from up 2 rafts near the north shore were splendid displays of fireworks, showers of colored fire streaming forth as the line moved. And you can imagine these 19th century fireworks blasting these wooden boats with sparks. And so here's a line drawing we have. I mean, can you imagine that Moody Street pond full of these large-scale, small-scale? Some of them were decorated like gondolas from Venice. Some of them were decorated to look like Chinese junks like that you see in Hong Kong. Like, just unbelievable with the fireworks. The governor, the lieutenant governor, the mayors of Cambridge and Waltham and Newton and Somerville would show up. All of the leading military folks in the area. This was like a huge deal. And it also involved drinks and dinner and dancing. So, naughty Newton at night, maybe. Although this is Waltham. They also line the bridges. So the American Watch Company, it's this intersection. It's not just the people having fun. The industry is also involved. So it's kind of like parades now have corporate sponsors. The corporate sponsors are still around back then. And for many of them, it was the place where they worked. They had special trains come out because people were coming from Boston, as far west as Marlborough, to come out and see these things. It was an absolutely incredible show. I love my last bullet point here in the newspapers. The saloons were closed. And somehow I feel like that wasn't a problem. Maybe a lot of people kind of, it was BYO situation. Here's the rickety footbridge that was over. That's the American Watch Company, the Waltham Watch. And now it's an actual bridge. Is it an actual bridge? Yeah, it's Prospect. That existed for only like 7 years. And it was notoriously rickety. And so they would line that when they would have these processions, and people would come out. It doesn't exist anymore, though. So then we have this huge kind of flourishing of the recreation industry, which will soon come to an end. So some of the principles kind of age out. This is the Harvey Bartlett that we saw owned the White Swan and also was involved in canoe manufacturing. He passes away. There's less interest. There's a new generation of workers that are more interested in going further afield, maybe to Hull or Scituate or down to the South Boston. Go to the ocean instead of the river. And so the White Swan is killed by the Prospect Street Bridge, which is too low. And of course, now we have cars. So instead of the river being the source of recreation, we get in our car and we drive to New Hampshire and then we go on a river. And so this is 128 near Needham being built. So we smash through 128, we put up a Marriott where Norumbega used to be, and it's an entirely changing society. So if you think of the canoe craze, we're mostly riding around on bicycles. The brass era of cars, like we have a car in our museum that's a wooden car. It's called an Orient Runabout. So once cars, though, after Henry Ford become accessible to regular working folks, they are able to take to the road and they want to go further away. And the infrastructure is built for that. And that means building lots and lots of roads. We also have the changeover from water power to steam power. And we actually know in the early 1900s, the Boston Manufacturing Company was still using all three of its water wheels underneath the mill, even as electricity was coming on board. And the reason is it's free. The river kept flowing. So why would we shut it down when we're still getting energy from the river? And so later, like the Waltham Gas Light Company is created across the river from Boston Manufacturing to power and light Boston Manufacturing. And they are then brought into coal-fired and then gas-fired electricity. And so in our museum's in the power plant, where they were burning 35 tons of coal a day, brought in by 2 rail cars from Everett. And like I said, the White Swan, this is where I want to have your help too. So the White Swan, from what I've read, is once the Prospect Street Bridge is built, they kind of discard it. From what I read in the newspapers of the time, they beached it on the riverbank. They took out the steam engine and put it on a refrigeration plant in Newton. And then they just left the carcass of the ship to rot on the riverbank. And I've never seen pictures. I feel like that would be a compelling subject of a picture, but for some reason we just don't have any kind of visual imagery of what happened to the poor White Swan after they killed it. So if you do have an old picture of that, then I would definitely like to see that. Now let's bring us up to the present. So, there was a whole while there from like the 20s all the way up through like the 60s where we just treated the river like it was a waste dump. And over time that accumulated. And so, we got like, love that dirty water, like it just became kind of a byword for disgusting pollution. When I grew up over in West Roxbury, and there's Havey Beach over on the way to Home Depot, and it's a full beach with, right by the river in Dedham, and there was a bathhouse there and everything, and nothing is left of it now. And even in 1996, when Bill Well jumped into the river fully clothed, we all kind of cringed. Now, however, it's a little bit better. We have lots of great organizations, the Charles River Watershed Association, DCR, even a little bit our museum, kind of bringing attention to the river and how we have to take care of it. There's a dam removal project in process, so you may have heard there's kind of interest in removing some of these dams and release the river to its natural flow. One thing to keep in mind is that once you remove the dam, all that polluted silt has to go somewhere. And you'll get this slug of polluted silt that will go all the way down to Boston Harbor to account for. Even if they scoop it out and dredge it and put it in dump trucks, the runoff from the dump trucks running across the streets is actually a big problem because it goes back into the storm drains. So it's so complicated. But I will say local indigenous folks, culture holders for the Nipmuc and the Wampanoags and the Massachusetts, they are advocating for returning the river. So the South Natick Dam, the Watertown Dam, we're looking for other future movements to kind of remove some of the dams. And that would actually, the Moody Street Dam is not going anywhere. It's a tier 1 if it went. It would be big trouble. So that's not going anywhere. And here we are. So what about the future of the river? So here's our museum in the back. Actually, that's the senior housing. Our museum's a little bit further down, but you see what Francis Cavallolo would call waste. The waterfall of the river coming over the dam. Just where those bushes are, that's where the canal would come into the parking lot and go under the mill to turn the water wheels. So we have the dam removal in Natick and Watertown. We're seeing the river as kind of a hub. That's why I'm so excited to have our museum connect with the Wooden Canoe Heritage Association and others that are interested in rediscovering the river. I mean, they didn't rediscover it, they knew about it the whole time, but to bring a broader audience to the river as an asset and not as something to kind of be grossed out by. By the way, it's brown and slimy, that means it's healthy. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but and all those mussels that I talked about at the beginning, they're cleaning the river. So there's a debate, but it seems like the most prudent thing to do is leave a lot of the muck in place on the river bottom, because stirring it up by trying to dredge it out makes it worse because you're turning it all up. So what about the future? So we know that recreation will be part of the story. We know that the canoes and boats and kayaks and the run of the Charles will be part of it. But we also have ideas around using the river for transportation again. So, an organization, startup like Waterhopper, is looking to get more interest in using the river as a way to transport people from place to place. By the way, a lot of the infrastructure is still there. When I look across Moody Street from Margaritas, I still see the stone steps coming down where the White Swan was. Or I see the pilings of Nuttings on the Charles. You go to Watertown Square, there is still a dock there. And so a lot of this infrastructure is not new, it's rediscovering that it's there. And so I think that will be a really important part. One thing to think about though is climate change. The river flow is different now. We in 2010 had a catastrophic flood in the museum. And so that was a huge rise that came up about 2 feet in our main gallery. And this summer we had a massive drought. And you could see the bottom all the way across the river in front of our museum. And so for things like transportation, they have to reckon with how do we practice this kind of transportation with a low flow or an unpredictable flow to the river. So I will end there with a plug. So from the Wooden Canoe Heritage Association, historian Benson Gray is doing a free talk at our museum about canoes specifically, and we'll have our restored canoes on display for you to see. And we have one Robertson from Auburndale, and we actually have 2 in our collection of H.B. Arnold's. And so check that out. I definitely would love you to check out more of the items that we have up here. And that is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was great. I understand if anyone needs to duck out, it is after 8, but I'm happy to open the floor to a few questions. And Stephen said he can answer them.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So you spoke about the ponding of
Yes.
the river just upstream from the Moody Street Dam.
Yes.
And my question pertains to North Auburndale and the so-called Lake District.
Mhm.
When I walk out there,
Mm-hmm.
I've been under the impression, incorrectly now I think, that the backflow of the river actually extended down into North Auburndale. So when I walk there, I always think, wow, if they took out the dam, how much more land would be, like there by Purgatory Cove
Yes.
or Forest Grove? But how far does it go?
So it's hard to know exactly, because if you took out the Moody Street Dam, first there would be kind of a catastrophic flow of water and pollution. Once that's settled down, you have kind of the natural process of the river. So you think about things like erosion, and the river and rivers naturally change their channel as they flow. So it's hard to predict. What we do know is that because of that weird kind of S curve that's made around there, that area most likely would be a wetland anyway. I think the question is how wet. And for Francis Cabot Lowell, remember they're damming the entire flow. Now we have topping over of the river. So there's a regulation in terms of just how much ponding could actually happen. And so I think if you were to release it, you would find a lower level of the river, maybe a return to its normal channel, maybe deeper in the middle because it will be now carving through. But I still think that land on the sides would be kind of marshy and mucky, and it would 100% be in a floodplain. So good luck having your insurance company, you know, if the EPA lets you build a house, your insurance company won't. But it's a good question, and Francis Cabot Lowell really thought about that, because if it went back too far, he would lose all that energy. It would be absorbed into the land, and it wouldn't be as regulating the power that he needed. And so, yeah, that's a good question, because it's really hard to predict, because also now we don't have the tidal flow up from Boston Harbor anymore too. So the river's natural state wouldn't be released just by releasing a dam or two. It would have to be an entire full sweep and then reinstituting the back bay. And I don't think that's going to happen, especially by who lives there. Yes? Oh, hold on, do you want to?
I'm coming over with the mic.
for the audience at home.
So I'm thinking of the timeline in your talk
Yes.
about the building of the factories and using the river for waste and
Yes.
all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And then you talk about recreation.
Yes.
And do you have any kind of thoughts or literature talking about the juxtaposition of those two things?
Yes. So a couple of things. One is that you have to remember that because of all the dams and everything, the pollution is cumulative. So what the Bleachery is putting out in 1825 is not the same as what you have in 1960. So you have a saturated, polluted water field, and you have like Polaroid and other companies kind of dumping waste in there. What we do know is as early as 18 teens, when they're steaming the mill and they're steaming the cotton fibers to keep them pliant, they're just boiling river water. And that river water is full of human waste. And so they're steaming these women in this germ-filled, nasty waste that's 100 degrees, 85% humidity, and they're wearing Victorian clothes. And just as a side note for anyone who's interested in kind of medicine and that kind of thing, so the shuttle is the piece that goes back and forth in the power loom. And in order to thread the shuttle, it has a metal tip, and you have to bring that thread through. And a lot of the women would suck on the tip to bring the thread through, and then they would, you know, the next woman on the shift would then do the same thing, and these things needed changing a lot. So now you have women who are getting sick, they're in steamy, nasty air, and now they're spreading germs through the shuttles, and it was called the kiss of death. And so you had just a germ-filled environment. When we get to recreation, I would say, yes, the river is polluted, it's nasty, it's especially worse downriver, so closer to Boston and Cambridge. And I would also say, that's not essentially what killed kind of the canoe industry or the recreation industry. It really was the car. And it was really people getting in cars and wanting to drive up to the White Mountains and do the thing they could have been doing on the Charles. And so that, because it changed the whole way urban planning was to center on roads and driving and parking. And the pollution of the river was just one of those things. People didn't really think about it until it got so bad. You know, you had like up in Woburn, for example, not that it's on the Charles, but like, you know, fire on the water. It was so chemically filled. And so, yeah, only when it got extreme did people actually start paying attention.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Additional question?
Thank you so much. This was so informative and
Thank you.
Vibrant, so I appreciate your energy in sharing this. And my question, maybe you answered it or maybe I've heard before, but how far up did the tidal quality of the water extend?
Probably about to where the Watertown Dam is. We know that the Moody Street Dam had a natural 10-foot fall. There's what's left of what's called the Bleachery Dam, a little bit further down. And then the Watertown Dam was the next big one. And so we think maybe that's where it was. We know that there were fish weirs, for example, down there. There were people who, indigenous people would get shellfish and stuff like that when the water would be low and that the fish would spawn. It's hard to know because without the Watertown Dam, how can we say how far up the river the fish would go to spawn? We know that, they put in fish ladders in the 70s. That was like a big thing. I don't know how successful they are. There's mixed kind of literature on that. But Watertown is a good kind of indicator of about where it would come up to. And of course, it totally changed with the filling in of the Back Bay. Because the Back Bay was a tidal flat. And so that was a really important part of the whole ecosystem that was just eliminated.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. If anyone else
Sure.
has one. So,
This is a quick one.
Sure.
Is the bleachery, or was the bleachery where the footbridge is now, sort of?
Yeah, so if you come out of our museum and you follow the boardwalk, and it goes under the bridge, is that River Street? What is that? Which one? Elm Street. And then it comes up the other side and you end up in the parking lot of Shaw's or a Stop and Shop. That's where the bleachery was, essentially. The Bleachery Dam you'll see right near it.
It's just like a little blip now, kind of, the bleachery dam?
It's just, the Bleachery Dam is crumbled in different parts. It does resist the flow of water, so it affects the way it flows,
Yeah.
but it's at essentially the water level,
Yeah.
so it can go around it. Last time I went there was like a mattress in there. So I think more concerningly, there's a food supermarket on top of a bleachery site, which I can't even imagine.
Sometimes if it's flowing, it looks like you can almost get a canoe over it, almost.
Almost, that's right, and it's tricky because a lot of that's just jagged stones, yeah, so don't recommend.
Great presentation,
Thank you, thank you.
all right, this will be our last question.
Are you aware and familiar with the 20th century boats? I took a boat from, I don't remember if we started at Waltham and ended up in Norumbega or the other way around, in 2000.
Yes.
And it was a motor launch that had a canopy
Mm-hmm.
that had to be lowered to get under the I-95 bridge.
Yes.
It's so deep.
Yes, there have been like different periods of people, as I would say, like trying it. I think that the flow is so unpredictable. When it's high, it's really high. When it's drought, it's really low. And the bottom is deceivingly shallow. And especially it dries out in points where it's like almost impassable. There's like a single channel. And I also know like we have an innovation space in our museum, and one of our students came to visit and said something like, yeah, my dad and I came in a boat. We parked over at the Moody Street Bridge, and it was like a motorboat. And so like there are sections that that are navigable. And I imagine that's what the owners of the White Swan thought. Like, hey, we can get a steamship up here. But really the Prospect Street Bridge, and that's, of all the bridges down the river, including the footbridges, that's really the problem bridge. And so you have to have a low enough clearance to get under there. Yeah, and whether they use ballast or whatever. But then you get into danger because it's only like, I don't know, 10 feet at the deepest. Yeah, it's tricky. But if you can do it, it's cool.
So that was going to be our last question. Stephen is here, so if you want to take a look at the materials that he brought, there's some in the front here and in the back. And you're welcome to ask him questions if you want to.
Yes.
But it looks like we have great events with them in March, as well as with Historic Newton. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really great.
Thank you.